NASSCOM NPC. This is my 11th year and doing it virtually for the first time. So it's been great to host this from here in San Francisco. And today I'm joined by good friend Dheeraj Pandey. Dheeraj is a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, legend, successful superstar here. So let's welcome Dheeraj to the stage as well.
Hi, Amar. How are you?
Hey, great, Dheeraj. Good morning to you. So
good morning to you as well, sir.
Yeah, and great to be here with you. I know a few years ago we hosted you physically in Bangalore, but man, it saved us a long flight back to India this time.
Well, I'm still itching to travel, meet people, shake hands, and looking forward to some of that by the end of this year.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Dheeraj, a couple of things. I mean, there's a lot of people in the audience, viewing us, and I think the big questions that have come up over the past couple of days, we'll go through some of those. But the first thing is, you tackled, when I was looking back at what you've done, a very hard space. The data center has been the bastion of large companies, incumbents with billions of dollars. When you started Nutanix, how did you look at this as this entry point for you? And what was in your mind? Just give us some thoughts as to why you got into this incredible space, the data center space.
Yeah, I mean, infrastructure was a large market, and we had our strengths because you need to have your strength as well that you bring to the table. And it was an underserved market. We thought that this idea of really bringing consumer cloud architecture to the masses was fairly underserved back in the day, 2009. There was a lot of big equipment purchase going on. There was not a whole lot of software. And this concept of commodity-driven consolidation was very disruptive. In large markets, you can think of what does it mean to really look at this red ocean, because people talk about the blue ocean and the red ocean. And I prefer to really go and build a company in the red ocean because you can be a faster shark, because that's what we had to be with the whales around us. And over the course of 10, 11 years, the kind of customer love that we got because we were so focused on the customer really gave us the opportunity to think about, like a couple of $1 billion worth of annual sales in last year, which if you start to add up, add another 2 billion of hardware, that's 4 billion, add another 2 billion of facilities and data center and ops, it's a $6 billion business, which is probably as big as Google's. So all of a sudden, because if you take out Google Apps, you have Google Compute Platform is as big as Nutanix. And you can build all of that in 10, 11 years if you're focused, if you have the conviction, and all you think about is the customer.
No, that's great. And most companies start up and do this, but how did you go about acquiring your first 3 to 5 customers to work with you, to trust you? And what was the strategy you employed to get those guys? That's the hardest.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first 3 years, obviously you have a general sense of direction, like you're going from San Francisco to New York. You kind of know that you have to go in this direction, these freeways and such, but there is a lot of micro pivots along the way. And as entrepreneurs, the only thing we didn't bring to the table was religion. We said we're going to do a few things using commodity-driven architecture, bring ease of use to the masses, because Apple was at the back of our minds, and we were all learning. 2009 was just a couple of years when the iPhone was introduced. So there was this glee and this newness, novelty about the convergence of our personal lives, and bringing that convergence of our personal lives to the end user in the data center was a big deal. Mm-hmm. And you could start to think about how everything could become pure software, just like a camera became just like a music player did become one. But it was hard. I mean, in the first 3 years, we almost had, I would say, 2 near-death experiences. Mm-hmm. And, in fact, even until 2014, the kind of things that happened with one of our competitors, it could have almost killed the company. And how you don't ride the highs and lows of these events and episodes, but have an even-keeled thinking. A lot of it is just down to mindfulness and patience and conviction. And it's like, you have passengers in an aircraft, and now you have turbulence. What do you do as an flight attendant? If you start to panic, then imagine what's going to happen to the passengers. So when you get these employees, you got to really be, patient and calm, and really navigate these kind of near-death experiences, which we did because our thesis early on was that we're going to run on top of VMware, and the first version of VMware that we ran on was not stable enough for our use case and our workload. So we kept trying and trying and trying, and obviously, as they say, luck favors the brave. In a matter of 6 months, VMware fortuitously upgraded their platform, and that basically made us live. There was another case like that in a couple of years, and people think of this as being a straight line. Nothing is a straight line. There's a lot of things you need to really stave off to build a company of value.
And how did you go about, Dheeraj, finding those first 2-3 customers? Did you have relationships in the past? Was it introductions, cold calls? As an entrepreneur, you're like trying to get those first guys. What was your effort in that space?
It's all of the above. Now, the important thing is that there's a bell curve of an audience. So if you go and talk to people, most of the people, this is like, I would say 95+% of the people said, you should not be building this. Because, we're trying to get, just like music and a phone into one, we're trying to get compute and storage into one. And the traditional thinking was that these two are silos. Now, eventually, we started to think about workloads that needed both together and workloads that didn't. So eventually, we didn't bring religion of hyperconvergence to everything. We did start to bring physics into a lot of our decision-making. But to begin with, the architecture was something that most people said you shouldn't do it. And there's a bell curve, of innovators. So you need to know who is an innovator and who is an early adopter and who is an early majority. And really have a gut on the fact that the early people that you go to are the ones that are really looking for new ideas. And it requires a lot of sampling to get to those people rather than, interviewing folks who are late majority or laggards who will say this will never work.
No, that's a good kind of wisdom to give some young entrepreneurs because they're so eager to get into the business. This is a good way to think through all this stuff. So the other thing, that keeps coming up as a theme is everybody looks like an overnight success, but nothing is an overnight success in business, especially in the enterprise space, right? So are there things you've learned in your 10, 11-year journey at Nutanix kind of to speed up that process a little bit? Because you look at Nutanix now, it's $2 billion, but it took you a long time. It wasn't like in 2 years, right? Are there things you look back you could have done to kind of speed it up a little bit?
We did it as fast as we ever could have. If anything, there are a few things I would have slowed down. Now thinking back, like the business model transition that we did as a public company. Ideally, we could have done this as a private company. So we could have slowed down the public going process because we did go public within 6 years of founding, 6.5 years of founding. And I feel like in hindsight now that there's a lot of hard work that was ahead of us that we did as a public company that we could have done as a private company as well. So the one thing I want to tell entrepreneurs is you don't have to be in a hurry. I think the biggest, baddest companies that actually have gone to become very, very large over time, they took their time to really go public. And you can do a lot in terms of the compounding effect. And what do I mean by that? There's a really good book that I talk about a lot. It's called Atomic Habits. And this idea of subscription and consumption, and when you get your customers who are paying every month using a credit card, that thing takes a while to compound. Because initially you're starting out with $10 a month a user, and you're basically giving up on the $100,000 account, which is an enterprise deal. A lot in the coming 10 years and even further going ahead will be grassroots. It's grassroots up, and a lot of that grassroots is going to be $10 a user a month, and that is going to be a little bit slower than you going after the mid-market, the $100,000 deal, the field rep, the field SE, the $500,000 team. That's going to change. I mean, there's massive disruption coming in enterprise sales, which is going to be more like Zoom and Twilio and all these companies like Stripe and others. They are building it with patience by saying, look, we got to really compound every user and think hard about consumption. So you really are focused on churn and attrition and net dollar-based expansion. And many of these things require patience.
Well, that's great. And by the way, our audience is very chatty, so we already got questions coming. So I'm going to throw one in from there. And that is, how did you view acquisitions at Nutanix? Was that used to kind of build the platform, immediately get sales? What did you do when you were there?
Well, it was never about immediate sales, because that would mean you're buying revenue, and buying revenue is always more expensive. I think the most important thing is meeting of the minds, which is people. Do you get people who you can learn with and from? And we looked at acquisitions. I always looked at acquisitions as you're going to learn from them and you're going to learn with them, and they bring something new to the table that your current core doesn't have. Because there's a certain way that the current core thinks about. Can you bring in another organization, another set of founders that you can learn from? And obviously, if the more you think about the platform and the apps, where the apps are just seamlessly able to integrate with your platform, the more these apps can also drive your core platform. At the end of the day, we built quite a few products on top of the platform, but they were never divergent. They were always going to pull through the core. So whenever you sell the app, you always sell the platform as well. And this is not an easy one, because many a time people go and buy companies that are not really fulfilling the core itself. And then the buyer gets confused as well. So it's not just about you. The buyer is like, well, if you are not connected and I don't really use, and there's no symbiosis between the two, then why do I not just look at a best of breed, which might not be you after all? So when you're trying to bring things together, there has to be immense synergy between things.
Yeah. Well, great feedback. Now that you've left Nutanix recently, become a private citizen again, what's in store for someone like you? You're not retired, right?
Well, I turned 45 in August, and I look to people like Arun, who is a great advisor to me and has always been a great mentor. He's going strong at 70. And I'm like, think about what life can be in the next 20, 30 years. There's so much to learn. At Nutanix, just in the last 6 months, I learned to know what letting go means. 11 and a half years at a company. I think not just the fact that I have interest in life sciences and learning about AI and machine learning, and also investing. What I'm learning these days about starting a family office and a fund and public equities for the first time, because I was so neck deep into just this monomaniacal focus of this one company's idea called Nutanix, that I've finally started to really put my head up and realize that there's a whole world out there. Life science is a big one. I'm learning about the cell and the chromosome and defining what a DNA is, and the genome and everything else, because it's fascinating what's going out there in the world, and especially after COVID. You realize how much more innovation and deregulation there will be. that I'm doing a lot of fundamental first principles reading there as well. Learning about SPACs, and just reading a lot about artificial intelligence, because again, it's really, really deep, and to really go apply any of those things and to know the limitations of machines, because at the end of the day, we have to represent knowledge with data and data structures, and that's what machines can go and make decisions on. So you realize how vulnerable AI is, because obviously there's a lot of froth about AI, and the only way to make it complete is with design. So you got to think a lot about what humans need to do to train the machine, because the representation knowledge that you come up with will be imperfect at best, because whenever you try to go and think about monetizing AI, you'll have to go and deal with engineering, and engineering is always imperfect and it's always a journey. And given all these things, there's no real relevance of AI without design. So really thinking about these as the yin yang together is keeping me busy.
That's great. Also, I think you have a great vantage point. You're on our friend Shantanu's board at Adobe, and digital is at the core of everything companies are doing today. So from that vantage point, how do you see the digital world playing out along with everything else these days?
Well, I go back to Adobe's transformation back in 2010 through 14, 15. And all I see is compounding, compounding. And this goes back to this idea of the $20 a month a user of a Creative Cloud user, and how they got rid of the middlemen along the way. Digital meant being in direct touch with the end user. And I think it was a really hard problem that they had to solve, because they were sitting on shelves as a box software before that. You can think of it as a software in a box, no different than Nutanix in a hardware box. It was really packaged like that, and it was sitting on the shelves of Fry's and Circuit City and Best Buy and such. And you had to bypass all of it. And to really build that relationship with the end user was a hard problem. But once they did that, now this monomaniacal focus on the end user, not having to think about this arbitrage that goes on in the channel and things like that, I think it brings the best out in companies. You need to start thinking even deeper about empathy and churn and credit card cancellations, and which day of the month do you bill the customer so that you have less bounce of credit cards, and all this stuff which really delves into the lives of people and what keeps them awake and what fascinates them. I've learned so much about design. It's one of the best companies to really have a front row seat and learn about design itself. I learned about patience and perseverance, and this idea of staying power. Look at Shantanu, 13, 14 years of perseverance, the first 6-7 years of building, the next 6-7 years of reaping, like what they've done to reap the benefits. I was looking at the annual statement of Adobe recently, and just looking at income before income taxes and net income, and how that thing has compounded like billion to 2 to 3 to 4 over the just last 4 or 5 years itself. It's just mind-boggling how efficient that company is. But eventually, all of it was this one thing: digital transformation, knowing your customer directly. It's what Tesla is doing, with cars. Every company wants to understand what it means to be directly in touch with the end user. That's what Amazon did so well with the retailer, and then finally with the enterprise computing user, was to get directly in touch with the end user.
Another question for you, Dheeraj, is what do you think of the IBM Red Hat merger and fallout and the future for a company like IBM?
I hope there's no fallout. Red Hat is a crown jewel for IBM right now. At the end of the day, the thesis that IBM and Red Hat have, which is a good thesis, that containers are the new tomorrow. It's not virtual machines. And this idea goes back. I mean, if you go back to the 80s, the big revolution in computing was take mainframes and atomize them into mini computers. And then the idea of the 90s was you take mini computers and atomize them into desktops and Windows servers with a smaller operating system. And then the idea of the 2000s was, well, you take a hardware-based server, which was a Windows server, and you atomize it into virtual machines. And then we are saying, oh, well, we need to atomize it one more time to containers and atomize it one more time to serverless functions and such. All we do in computing is just make things smaller and smaller and smaller, because with that, you can disperse it and people can spin it up faster and cheaper and better and such. And you just bring more agility to innovation, because the faster you can spin it up and spin it down, the more agile it becomes. And now cloud has added another angle of time, which means you spin it up for 2 hours, not spin it up for 3 years. So I think it's definitely a very revolutionary idea, containers, but it's going to be embedded in every company's operating system, especially the ones that deal with infrastructure. We'll think about this as coming together of storage and compute and networks and security. They all have to be sold as a package. But I think it's great for developers. We have immense respect for Red Hat. I mean, I look up to people like Paul Cormier and Jim. And again, going back to staying power, Paul did this over 10 years, but in 2000, 2010, and they could have given up in 2010, saying Linux was commodity, but it was not. I think they kept going for the next 4 years and finally found this thing called, back in the day, they didn't call it Kubernetes. It was called Docker. And, we had things inside the Linux operating system that they were trying to leverage. But over the course of the last 10 years, what Red Hat has built is really meaningful. So kudos to the team and kudos to the staying power of Red Hat.
Great. And we have 30 seconds left, Dheeraj. So any words of advice for the young entrepreneur sitting in India or some other country trying to cook up the next company? What do you say?
Values. I always think about my 4 values. We had 3, but now we've made it 4. And have your own, something that's simple, something that every employee in your company can remember. So we had hungry, humble, honest, with heart. And if everybody around the world, all employees and even customers can relate to that, you'll build a great company.
Fantastic. Dheeraj, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll hear from you soon. Take care now.
Thanks. Thank you, Mark.